for joining us here today. I'm Mike Kiernan. I'm the vice chair of the Iowa Democratic Party and also sit on the Democratic National Committee. Obviously, caucus season is heating up, and we have a candidate who's again announced today, Tim Pawlenty. Our goal here today was to kind of open up and talk and have a little civil dialogue in regards to Mr. Pawlenty. He obviously sees Iowa as a huge opportunity to jump off and really get his campaign moving nationally. Why he's a relatively unknown commodity to most of the nation. I think he believes this is where he starts his campaign and where he makes a big splash. As you folks know, caucus goers really like to kick the tires and look under the hood. One of the things Mr. Pawlenty mentioned today was the fact that he wanted to cut ethanol subsidies, which for an Iowan I found disturbing and also surprising since he supported ethanol subsidies in Minnesota.
My name is Ken Martin. I'm the chair of the Minnesota DFL, which is the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota. And I'm happy to be down here in sunny Iowa today. Last night, Tim Pawlenty released an online video where he said he's going to try something different and run a campaign that tells people the truth. Well, telling the truth would be very different for Tim Pawlenty because he's been lying about his record in Minnesota at every one of his campaign stops over the last several months. So I'm here today to tell the real truth about what Tim Pawlenty did to Minnesota during his time as governor. Our former governor's announcement today isn't a surprise to anyone. He spent the better part of his last 2 years in office ignoring the needs of his state while trying to woo the Republican base. And here he is today announcing in Iowa, instead of his home state of Minnesota, so he can avoid his miserable record back home. And as much as he tries to rewrite history while campaigning around the country, the facts of his record in Minnesota tell the real story. Tim Pawlenty bankrupted the future of our state, and the last thing he deserves is a chance to do the same thing to our nation. Pawlenty left Minnesota with a $6.2 billion deficit, the largest in Minnesota's 152-year history. His use of budget gimmicks and the fact that he borrowed money from K-12 schools downgraded Minnesota's bond rating for the first time in decades and stalled our state's economy. As the St. Paul Pioneer Press said, Governor Pawlenty's tenure was like a continuing drama of plugging one hole just in time to confront another. During Governor Pawlenty's tenure, state and local tax rates increased for 90% of Minnesotans. Property taxes went up by nearly $2.7 billion. That's a 53.8% increase on taxes that hit middle-class Minnesotans and small businesses especially hard. But it wasn't just Pawlenty's fiscal record that hurt Minnesotans time and time again. Governor Pawlenty's record on health care was abysmal for Minnesotans, but great for big insurance companies. Governor Pawlenty's policies drove up premiums for Minnesotans, overburdened hospitals, and forced 7,500 layoffs in the state's hospital system alone. The number of uninsured Minnesotans jumped from 6.1% in the year before he was elected to 9.1% in 2009. And during his tenure, the cost of insurance premiums for Minnesotans with private insurance doubled. Governor Pawlenty's draconian cuts reduced access to health care for seniors, caused nursing homes to close, and cut personal care services for 1,600 disabled Minnesotans. He single-handedly shut down a state program that helped the poorest and sickest Minnesotans, and he kicked 113,000 Minnesotans off of their health care. And he did all of that in addition to awarding no-bid contracts to HMOs for the state health programs. And how did this make Minnesota better? It didn't. Tim Pawlenty's record is proof that he doesn't even come close to having the courage to face the country's problems as he claims. He doesn't even have the courage to fess up to the real impact that his policies had on families in his home state of Minnesota. There is nothing in Governor Pawlenty's record that would warrant a promotion. And there's nothing in Tim Pawlenty's record that would indicate in any way that he would make our country a better place to live in if he were elected president. And if he can't even come up with why he's running for president, then there's certainly nothing in Governor Pawlenty's record that would fill in that blank for him. I'm glad to be here today to set the record straight on Tim Pawlenty's so-called achievements in Minnesota, because take it from those of us who know him best, his kind of leadership is devastating for real people and especially hard on middle-class families. Both Mike and I are happy to take questions. Here he is running around the country trying to reinvent himself. The fact is, he supported ethanol subsidies in Minnesota. He comes down to Iowa, in a state that is a corn state much like Minnesota, that relies on these subsidies, and he does one of these. He holds his finger up in the wind and sees which way the political wind is blowing. Tim Pawlenty is nothing more than a political chameleon trying to reinvent his stripes at every state that he travels in. And the Minnesota DFL, under my leadership, and Democrats in Minnesota are going to continue to expose his record throughout this country as he tries to reinvent himself. Because again, Tim Pawlenty is nothing more than a political chameleon, and today's announcement proves that. We're not going to be able to fly all over the country, obviously, but we've already been on conference calls in New Hampshire and in Iowa and other states, making sure that the people of those states understand that Tim Pawlenty is doing nothing more than politically trying to reinvent himself at this time, and that he can't escape his record. We're going to continue to remind voters around this country that he has a record of the last 8 years as governor of Minnesota, and we're going to make sure that people know what that record was.
And what's the advantage of you, Truth Texas Governor Pawlenty, rather than having Republican opponents?
Well, I think they will. And the fact is, though, why do you think he's announcing right now so early and in Iowa? Because he wants to run away from his record. And the fact is that I think in due time his Republican opponents and others will highlight some of his failures as governor. But we're going to continue to do so because we think it's important for all people in this country to understand exactly what Tim Pawlenty did as governor. And it's easy to say one thing in another state when no one's there to hold your feet to the fire. But we're going to be there to hold his feet to the fire.
Ken, on the issue of
A few short years ago, say that you're going to be the nation's leading state in terms of alternative fuels and making sure that we make investments in alternative fuels like ethanol. And he was a big supporter of not only on the National Governors Association but also the RGA of trying to lead the nation in alternative fuel sources. And here he is a few short years later saying that we need to cut these subsidies, that's not the solution. Well, the fact is if you cut these solutions, we're not going to be able to lead the state or the nation in the production of biofuels like ethanol. The fact is, under his leadership, property taxes went up to the tune of $2.7 billion, almost 53%, because he shifted that responsibility onto local governments. The only way he was able to balance a budget is to borrow from future generations, essentially, by shifting the cost of the K-12 budget proposals onto future legislatures. That's not responsibility. If you're running for president, you have enormous responsibility, and you can't kick these decisions down the road to future elected officials, which is essentially what Pawlenty did, all in an effort to say that he didn't raise taxes, all in an effort to say that he balanced the budget. The fact is we're facing the biggest budget deficit in our state's history, and it's all as a result of Tim Pawlenty's reckless policies the last 8 years. The point is he's from Minnesota. He served as governor. I think this is nothing more than him knowing that if he announced in Minnesota, he would have to answer some very tough questions by the press and the people of Minnesotans who are very disappointed in the record that he left, and the fact that he left them holding a bag filled with some pretty nasty stuff that we have to, frankly, clean up his mess at this point. I will say this about Tim Pawlenty. Tim Pawlenty has always been, since his times on the Eagan City Council, the time when he was the majority leader in the Senate, he was a centrist Republican. And over the years, he's moved very far to the right to try to woo this base as he prepares for his run for the presidency. He's always been trying to reinvent himself. At many different stages in his political life, he's reinvented himself. And to me, again, here he is running for president, as he announces here in Iowa, trying to convince voters that he's someone that he actually isn't.
Mike,
This is a very important state in terms of presidential politics. But the fact that he doesn't have any campaign appearances in Minnesota, he could have announced, we drove down this morning. It took us 3.5 hours. He could have announced this morning in Minnesota, drove down here and still made the big splash. So I'm not entirely sure why he chose it. I'm not here to attack the fact that he announced in Iowa. That's his prerogative. But I do think it's unique and it's strange. Most presidential candidates announce in their home state.